He thought he was protecting the prestige of a five-star empire, but in less than 10 minutes, he would realize he had just insulted the woman who owned half of it. The Aurora Grand Hotel rose 32 stories above downtown Chicago, its glass facade catching the late afternoon sun like a polished mirror. Inside, Italian marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers worth more than most suburban homes, and a soft string quartet played near the lobby bar where guests in tailored suits and designer dresses sipped $28 cocktails without glancing at the price. The revolving doors turned slowly, and Clara Bennett stepped inside wearing a simple navy cotton dress and low beige flats. Her light brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, no diamonds, no designer logos, nothing to announce that she belonged anywhere other than a quiet coffee shop on a Sunday morning. She paused just inside the entrance, taking in the scent of fresh lilies arranged in towering vases and the faint polish of recently buffed floors, her expression calm, observant, almost curious. Clara had been in luxury hotels before. She just preferred not to look like she had. She walked toward the front desk where a long slab of white stone stretched beneath soft golden lighting. Behind it stood Madison Reed, perfectly styled blonde waves resting on the shoulders of her tailored black blazer, posture straight, smile practiced. Madison's eyes flicked up, scanning Clara in less than a second. The dress, the shoes, the absence of a visible brand name handbag. The smile cooled by a degree so subtle most wouldn't notice. "Good afternoon," Clara said gently. "I have a reservation under Bennett." Madison's fingers hovered above the keyboard but didn't move. "Of course," she replied, tone polite yet edged with something sharper. "May I see a credit card and photo ID?" Clara slid her driver's license across the marble. Madison examined it longer than necessary, her gaze drifting again to Clara's outfit as if trying to reconcile the last name with the presentation in front of her. In luxury hospitality, appearance often whispered before credentials spoke. Around them, a couple in designer sunglasses laughed near the concierge desk, while a bellman pushed a cart stacked with monogrammed luggage toward the elevators. The environment hummed with quiet affluence, and Clara stood alone in its center, unadorned, unassuming. Madison typed slowly, her manicured nails clicking against the keys. "Hey." Faint crease formed between her brows. "I'm not seeing an active suite reservation," she said, though the booking confirmation had been made weeks earlier. Clara tilted her head slightly, unfazed. "It should be for the presidential suite." The words sounded almost out of place coming from someone dressed so modestly. Madison's lips pressed into a thin line. In this hotel, suites were typically associated with private jets and black cards, not cotton dresses and sensible flats. And just a few feet away, the general manager, Ethan Caldwell, had begun to notice the interaction, adjusting his cufflinks as he turned toward the desk, unaware that the next decision he made would echo far beyond the lobby's gleaming marble walls. Madison cleared her throat and angled the monitor slightly away as if shielding the screen from scrutiny. "I am showing a pending reservation request," she said carefully, her tone shifting from polite to procedural. "However, the presidential suite requires verification for all guests prior to check-in." Clara rested her hands lightly on the marble counter, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. "Verification of what exactly?" she asked. The question was not defensive, merely curious, as though she were observing a case study unfold in real time. Before Madison could respond, Ethan Caldwell approached with measured steps, his tailored charcoal suit fitting perfectly across his shoulders, silver tie bar catching the chandelier light. He offered a professional smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good afternoon," he said, glancing briefly at Clara before turning his attention to the computer screen. "Is there an issue?" Madison gave a subtle nod. "This guest is claiming the presidential suite reservation under Bennett." Ethan's gaze moved slowly back to Clara, assessing, calculating. He had managed the Aurora Grand for 6 years and prided himself on maintaining what he called brand integrity. In his experience, that meant knowing who belonged and who did not before a single word was exchanged. "Miss Bennett," he began smoothly, "our top-tier accommodations are typically reserved for established clients who have a verified history with the property." Clara met his eyes calmly. "I believe my reservation was confirmed," she replied. Ethan offered a sympathetic tilt of his head that felt rehearsed. "I am afraid the suite is no longer available." He did not check the system again. He did not ask further questions. The decision had already been made. Behind Clara, a family stepped aside with their designer luggage, whispering quietly as they waited. The quartet near the bar shifted into a softer melody, the music almost cushioning the tension forming at the desk. Clara inhaled slowly, as if measuring the air. "So my confirmed reservation has disappeared?" she asked. Ethan folded his hands in front of him. "We occasionally reassign premium rooms when discretion is required. We can offer a standard deluxe room at a rate of $600 per night." The implication hovered between them. The presidential suite, at nearly $4,000 per night, was clearly not meant for someone dressed like her. Clara nodded once, absorbing the statement without protest. "And what if I prefer the suite I reserved?" she asked. Ethan's smile tightened. "Then I would suggest contacting the booking platform for clarification. In the meantime, we must prioritize guests whose profiles align with the expectations of our brand." The words were polished, corporate, carefully chosen. Yet the meaning was unmistakable. A subtle glance passed between Madison and Ethan, a silent confirmation of judgment rendered. Clara felt the eyes of strangers brush against her back like a cool draft. She could have corrected them. She could have made one phone call. Instead, she simply stood there, studying the chandelier reflections on the marble floor, as though allowing the moment to fully reveal itself before she decided what to do next. The air between them felt thinner now, as though the polished marble and crystal light fixtures were watching the exchange with quiet interest. Clara studied Ethan for a long second, not with anger, not with embarrassment, but with a calm that unsettled him more than outrage ever could. "I understand," she said gently. "So the suite is unavailable because I do not fit the profile." Ethan did not confirm it, yet he did not deny it either. "We simply maintain standards," he replied, smoothing his jacket as if that settled the matter. Clara nodded once more, then reached into her handbag and retrieved her phone. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. Madison's eyes tracked the device as though expecting a complaint call or a social media threat. Instead, Clara stepped slightly away from the desk, near one of the tall windows overlooking Michigan Avenue where taxis lined the curb and the late afternoon traffic crawled through downtown. She tapped a contact at the top of her screen and waited. Across the lobby, a concierge discreetly pretended not to watch. "Hi," Clara said softly when the call connected. Her voice was warm, composed. "Are you still upstairs?" A pause. "Yes, I checked in early," she continued. "There seems to be a small misunderstanding at the front desk." Her gaze drifted briefly toward Ethan, who now stood with his arms loosely crossed, projecting patience. "Would you mind coming down for a moment?" She ended the call without raising her voice, without explaining further. Ethan offered a thin smile. "If you are attempting to reach a booking service, our staff can assist with that," he said. Clara returned to the counter and placed her phone face down on the marble. "No need," she replied. "Someone will be down shortly." The confidence in her tone did not match her appearance, and that contradiction made Madison shift slightly on her heels. The lobby doors rotated again, admitting a gust of autumn air and a group of investors in tailored navy suits who crossed toward the elevators with purposeful strides. Ethan glanced at his watch. He had a meeting scheduled in 15 minutes on the 28th floor, a presentation regarding quarterly expansion. The Aurora Grand was not just a hotel, it was a flagship property in a rapidly growing hospitality empire. Protecting its image was, in his mind, an act of loyalty. "Miss Bennett," he said coolly, "if there is nothing further, we will need to assist other guests." The words were courteous, yet dismissive. Clara did not move. She simply waited, hands resting lightly against the counter, as though she were perfectly comfortable standing there indefinitely. The string quartet shifted into a slower melody. A subtle tension settled across the marble floor like a ripple beneath still water. Then, above the hum of conversation and clinking glassware, a soft mechanical chime echoed through the lobby as one of the private executive elevators began its descent. Ethan did not notice at first. Madison did. Her eyes flicked toward the brushed steel doors near the concierge station, reserved exclusively for ownership and board members. The indicator lights counted down steadily. 28, 27, 26. And for the first time since Clara had walked in, the certainty in Ethan Caldwell's posture began to falter. The elevator chimes sounded again, softer this time, yet impossibly louder in the silence that followed. The brushed steel doors slid open with controlled precision, revealing William Bennett stepping forward in a tailored midnight blue suit, his silver cuff links catching the chandelier light with understated authority. Two members of the executive board stood just behind him, mid-conversation, their voices fading as they registered the stillness spreading across the lobby. William's posture was relaxed but purposeful, the kind of presence that did not need to demand attention because it naturally commanded it. His eyes scanned the marble expanse and landed on Clara standing calmly at the front desk. The faint crease in his brow deepened. "Clara," he said, his voice even, warm, but edged with concern. "Is everything all right?" The room seemed to contract around the question. Conversations near the bar paused. A bellman froze mid-step. Madison's fingers stopped moving over the keyboard. Ethan felt the shift instantly, recognition striking not from the voice alone, but from the quiet deference shown by the board members behind William. He knew that face from quarterly reports, from framed photographs in the executive corridor, from the very foundation documents that had built the Aurora Grand into a national brand. William Bennett was not simply a guest. He was the majority owner of the entire hospitality group. Clara turned toward him with the same composure she had held since entering. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding my reservation," she said gently. William's gaze moved from her to the front desk, then to Ethan. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush. He simply stepped closer, the polished leather of his shoes echoing lightly against the marble floor. "What kind of misunderstanding?" he asked. Ethan swallowed, adjusting his tie as though it had suddenly tightened. "Sir, we were under the impression that the presidential suite required additional verification," he began, his tone shifting from authority to careful explanation. William's expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened, not anger, but clarity. "Verification of my wife?" he asked quietly. The words landed with the weight of reality. Madison's face drained of color. A couple near the concierge exchanged startled glances. The string quartet faltered for half a second before continuing their melody. Clara said nothing. She allowed the truth to settle over the marble and crystal like a final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. William turned fully toward Ethan now. "Who informed you that Clara Bennett does not meet the standards of this property?" he asked, his voice calm, almost conversational. Ethan's rehearsed confidence evaporated under the steady gaze. "That was not our intention," he replied quickly. William studied him for a long moment, then glanced briefly around the lobby at the guests who had witnessed everything. "Standards," he repeated softly, as if testing the word for meaning. The silence that followed was not loud, yet it was absolute. In that stillness, the illusion of control shifted, and everyone in the Aurora Grand understood that the definition of belonging had just changed. The word hung in the air like a verdict. William did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He simply let the silence do what anger never could. "Standards," he repeated again, his tone almost reflective. "Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, what standard did my wife fail to meet?" Ethan felt every eye in the lobby shift toward him. The marble floors that once symbolized prestige now felt like a stage. "Sir, there must have been a miscommunication," he said carefully, choosing each word as though stepping across thin ice. "We were only attempting to protect the exclusivity of the presidential suite." William nodded once, slowly. "Exclusivity," he said. "And how exactly is exclusivity determined?" Madison's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a stack of key cards that did not need adjusting. The board members behind William remained silent, observing. Clara stood beside her husband, calm, neither triumphant nor humiliated, simply present. William finally turned his gaze back to Ethan. "The Aurora Grand was built on one principle," he said evenly. "Every guest is treated with dignity first. Everything else comes after." The statement was not loud, yet it carried across the entire lobby. A guest near the bar lowered his glass. A concierge straightened instinctively. Ethan attempted to recover. "Of course, sir. That is always our priority." William studied him for a long moment, then glanced toward Madison. "Was my wife's confirmed reservation canceled because of availability?" he asked. Madison swallowed. "No, sir." "Was it canceled because of payment verification?" William continued. "No, sir." The answer was barely audible. William nodded once more, the pieces aligning without effort. Then it was cancelled because of perception. The truth landed heavier than accusation. Ethan's shoulders dropped a fraction. That was not the intention, he said, though the confidence from earlier had completely vanished. William did not respond immediately. He looked around the lobby at the chandeliers, the polished brass railings, the perfectly arranged floral displays. Luxury, he said quietly, is not marble. It is not crystal. It is not a $4,000 suite. His eyes returned to Ethan. Luxury is how people feel when they walk through that door. Clara finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. We wanted to see how the hotel treats someone who appears ordinary. The admission sent a ripple through the staff. William gave a slight nod. And now we know. He did not demand termination. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he turned to one of the board members. Schedule a mandatory hospitality review for every management-level employee within the week, he said calmly. Starting with leadership. Ethan's breath caught. A review from ownership was not a small matter. It was a formal evaluation that determined futures. William then stepped closer to the counter and gently picked up Clara's identification card, handing it back to her with a faint smile. Prepare the presidential suite, he said without looking away from Ethan. My wife's reservation stands. The room remained silent as Madison hurried to type, the keys clicking rapidly now. And in that quiet lobby beneath the glittering chandeliers, everyone understood that true status had never been about appearance. It had always been about character. Madison's fingers moved quickly now, her earlier hesitation replaced by urgency, as she reactivated the reservation and printed the key packet with precise efficiency. The soft hum of the printer seemed louder than it should have been, echoing against marble and glass. Your suite is ready, Mrs. Bennet, she said carefully, her voice stripped of the cool detachment it once carried. Clara accepted the key card with a polite nod. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction in seeing discomfort flicker across the faces behind the desk. She had not come downstairs for applause. She had come for clarity. William remained composed, his presence steady rather than imposing. Mr. Caldwell, he said calmly, walk with me. Ethan hesitated only a fraction of a second before stepping out from behind the counter. The board members followed at a respectful distance as they moved a few feet away from the front desk, still within view of the lobby. The guests resumed quiet conversation, though more subdued now, as if the building itself had absorbed a lesson. William stopped near the tall windows overlooking the city traffic below. Leadership is not about protecting marble and chandeliers, he said evenly. It is about protecting values. Ethan kept his eyes forward, jaw tight. Yes, sir. William continued. The Aurora Grand does not exist to impress people who already feel important. It exists to make every guest feel respected. The words were not harsh, but they carried weight heavier than reprimand. Clara approached slowly, standing beside them. We travel often, she said gently. Sometimes I dress like this on purpose. It tells me more about a place than any brochure ever could. Ethan finally met her eyes. The realization there was unmistakable. This had not been a random encounter. It had been a measure. I understand, he said quietly, though the confidence he once displayed was gone. William gave a single nod. There will be a formal review, he stated. Not to punish, but to correct. He glanced toward the front desk, where Madison stood straighter than before, listening even from a distance. Training will begin immediately. Every employee will be reminded that assumptions are not part of our brand. The quartet shifted into a brighter melody, as if the atmosphere itself had changed. Clara slipped her hand lightly through William's arm, her demeanor unchanged from the moment she entered. That is enough, she said softly. William looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. He turned back to Ethan. One more thing, he added. If a guest ever stands at that desk again and feels smaller because of how they look, then we have failed. The statement lingered long after he stepped away. Madison handed Clara a fresh set of keys, along with a printed welcome letter signed personally by William months earlier. This time, her smile reached her eyes. Enjoy your stay, she said sincerely. Clara offered a warm nod in return. As she and William crossed the lobby toward the executive elevators, the marble floors reflected more than crystal light. They reflected a quiet shift in understanding. And in that gleaming space built to symbolize wealth, the true measure of status had revealed itself not in price per night, but in how one human being chose to treat another. The executive elevator doors closed with a soft, deliberate hush, sealing Clara and William inside a space lined with brushed gold panels and mirrored glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension from the lobby did not follow them upward, yet the weight of what had just occurred lingered in the quiet hum of ascent. Clara exhaled slowly, her reflection meeting her own steady gaze in the mirror. "You did not have to come down," she said gently. William glanced at her, a faint smile touching his expression. "You did not have to test them," he replied. The elevator indicator climbed steadily past the 20th floor. Clara folded her hands in front of her. "I needed to know," she said. "If this hotel carries your name, it should carry your values." William nodded once, thoughtful rather than defensive. "It does," he said quietly. "But sometimes values drift when no one is watching." The doors opened onto the private executive level, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline, stretching toward Lake Michigan. The presidential suite entrance stood at the end of a hushed corridor lined with modern artwork and soft carpeting that absorbed every footstep. A staff member waited there, posture attentive, eyes respectful, holding the suite door open. "Welcome, Mrs. Bennett," he said sincerely. The tone was different from downstairs. Not performative, not cautious, simply courteous. Clara stepped inside, the suite unfolding in warm light and expansive views, yet she paused near the entrance instead of walking further. "It is beautiful," she acknowledged softly, though her mind remained downstairs in the lobby. William dismissed the attendant with a quiet nod, then turned to face her fully. "The review will be thorough," he said. "But I wanted to teach, not intimidate." Clara's gaze softened. "Good," she replied. "Because humiliation only breeds silence. Understanding changes behavior." William studied her for a long moment, admiration clear in his eyes. "You always see further than the moment," he said. She gave a faint smile. "No," she answered. "I just remember what it feels like to be underestimated." Outside the window, traffic crawled through downtown streets, unaware that a quiet recalibration had just taken place several stories above. Downstairs, Ethan remained at the front desk longer than necessary, replaying every word in his mind. The marble, the chandeliers, the polished image he had worked so hard to maintain now seemed less impressive than the simple steadiness of the woman he had dismissed. Madison moved with renewed care, greeting each arriving guest with eye contact and genuine warmth, as if trying to repair something invisible but essential. Back in the suite, Clara finally stepped further inside, setting her handbag on the console table. "I hope they learn," she said quietly. William joined her at the window, looking out over the city lights beginning to glow in the fading afternoon. "They will," he replied. "Because today was not about power." He turned toward her again. It was about perspective. And in the stillness of that high floor above the city, both of them understood that influence was most powerful when it did not need to announce itself. Evening settled over Chicago with a soft amber glow, the city lights flickering on one by one like quiet witnesses to the day's lesson. Downstairs in the lobby, the atmosphere had changed in ways that were subtle yet undeniable. Guests were still checking in, bell carts still rolling across polished marble, crystal chandeliers still casting their flawless reflections, but something beneath the surface had shifted. Ethan Caldwell stood in his office overlooking the lobby floor, jacket removed, sleeves neatly folded at his wrists. The confidence that once defined his posture had been replaced with contemplation. He replayed Clara's calm expression in his mind, not the revelation of her status, but the steadiness she carried even before anyone knew who she was. It unsettled him because it forced him to confront something deeper than policy. He had not enforced a rule. He had enforced an assumption. Madison, meanwhile, greeted a middle-aged couple entering through the revolving doors, her smile warmer now, her voice softer but sincere. "Welcome to the Aurora Grand," she said, maintaining eye contact as she listened carefully to their request. There was no quick glance at their clothing, no silent categorizing, just attention. Upstairs, Clara stood near the suite window watching the skyline glow against Lake Michigan. The room was expansive, elegant, meticulously arranged, yet her focus remained on the people below rather than the view above. William joined her, hands resting loosely in his pockets. "The hospitality review begins tomorrow morning," he said. Every department head will attend. Clara nodded. Not to punish, she reminded gently. To reset. William agreed. Leadership forgets sometimes that power is quiet. It does not need to prove itself. He paused, then added thoughtfully, what happened today will circulate quickly through the company. Clara gave a faint smile. Good. Let it circulate as a reminder, not as fear. The suite remained still, the city humming far below. At the front desk, Ethan eventually returned, posture straight, but eyes more aware. He approached Madison quietly. From this point forward, he said evenly, no guest is measured by appearance. We verify reservations by record, not by perception. Madison nodded firmly. The correction was simple, but its impact would ripple far beyond one afternoon. Back upstairs, Clara adjusted the curtains slightly, watching the last light fade into night. You know, she said softly, the most revealing moments are not when people know who you are. They are when they think you are no one. William studied her reflection in the glass. And today, he replied, they learned that no one is ever truly no one. Outside, traffic lights blinked red and green. Taxis moved steadily, and the Aurora Grand continued to shine against the skyline. Yet within its polished walls, something far more valuable than marble had been restored. And in that quiet recalibration, dignity became the true signature of the building, far more lasting than any name etched on its entrance. The next morning arrived with a clarity that felt deliberate, sunlight spilling across the Chicago skyline and pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite. Clara stood quietly with a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the city wake beneath her. Downstairs, the Aurora Grand moved with its usual rhythm, luggage rolling across marble, espresso machines humming, soft greetings exchanged at the front desk. Yet for those who worked there, the day carried a new awareness. In the executive conference room on the 28th floor, department heads sat around a polished walnut table, posture attentive, expressions measured. Ethan Caldwell sat among them, no longer projecting quiet superiority, but quiet accountability. William stood at the head of the table, not with theatrical authority, but with calm expectation. Yesterday was not a crisis, he began evenly. It was a mirror. No one interrupted. The statement needed no elaboration. We built this company on the belief that dignity is not reserved for certain guests, he continued. It is extended to everyone who walks through our doors. Ethan felt the weight of those words settle, not as humiliation, but as instruction. He spoke when invited, voice steady but honest. Assumptions replace standards, he admitted. That will not happen again. William nodded once. Good, he replied. Because reputation is not protected by exclusion. It is protected by integrity. The meeting concluded not with reprimands, but with directives. Mandatory hospitality retraining. Revised verification procedures based strictly on reservation data. A renewed emphasis on listening before judging. Back in the suite, Clara adjusted the cuff of her simple navy dress as she prepared to head downstairs for a charity luncheon scheduled in the ballroom. She chose the same understated style she had worn the day before. No statement pieces. No designer labels. Just quiet confidence. When she stepped into the lobby later that afternoon, conversations did not stop in shock. They continued naturally. Madison greeted her with a sincere smile. Good afternoon, Mrs. Bennett. There was no fear in her tone, only respect. Ethan approached as well, posture composed. We appreciate the lesson, he said quietly. Clara met his gaze without resentment. It was not meant as a lesson, she replied softly. It was meant as a reminder. He nodded, understanding. As Clara crossed the marble floor once more, the chandeliers reflected her silhouette just as brightly as they had reflected gowns and tailored suits the night before. Yet now the reflection carried a different meaning. It was not about status revealed. It was about dignity recognized. William watched from a distance for a moment before joining her side. Together they moved through the lobby not as owners asserting control, but as leaders reinforcing values. And in that gleaming hotel that once measured worth by perception, something far more valuable had taken root. Because in the end, luxury fades, titles shift, and appearances change. But the way you treat someone when you think they are no one at all, that is what defines who you truly are.